NBA contracts are pretty funny. When looking around the league, it's staggering to see just how large a contract can be for a reliable NBA player. For example, a guy like Michael Porter Jr., who never has and likely never will make an All-Star team, is currently on a 5-year, $179 million contract with the Nuggets, and nobody bats an eye about it today. However, Kevin Garnett, who is one of the greatest players in NBA history, received a ton of backlash for his 6-year, $126 million deal that he signed back in 1998. And a big reason for this is the context surrounding both contracts. Depending on the player's age, their team's roster, and the front office's willingness to spend, there are a million reasons why a contract can either be deemed good or bad. Today, we're going to be ranking the 26 biggest contracts in NBA history, and rank them based not only on their personal accomplishments, but what the deal has meant in relation to the teams that they play for, and put them into one of 4 tiers: disaster, disappointment, necessary overpay, and home run. Before we get started, I want to point out that I will not be including any contracts that haven't began yet. So for example, the infamous Jaylen Brown $300 million extension from this past summer will not be included. This also applies to guys like LaMelo, Anthony Edwards, and Tyrese Halliburton, who all signed contracts north of $200 million this past offseason. We'll only be looking at deals with players that have had at least one full year under the contract mentioned, so we have some sort of data to assess. And with that out of the way, let's get started with the list. Kicking off the absolute disaster tier, we have John Wall's 4-year, $171 million deal that he signed with the Wizards back in 2017. At the time of the signing, it honestly made a ton of sense. Wall was coming off of the best year of his career and was viewed as a consensus top 5 point guard in the league. Unfortunately, it would only go down from that point. During the first year under his new contract, he played in just 32 games before it was announced that he would miss the rest of the season with a heel injury. While recovering from that, he slipped in his home and ruptured his Achilles, which meant that he would miss all of the 2020 season as well. From there, he was traded to the rebuilding Rockets, where it was clear that he was no longer the player he used to be. And since Houston was actively tanking at the time, him and the front office agreed that he would not play at all during the 2022 season, as he sat out for the entire campaign. He was then bought out of this contract and signed with the Clippers for a cup of coffee before being traded back to Houston, got waived by them, and is now currently out of the league. So he ended up playing for a total of just 72 games over the course of this 4-year deal, received 0 accolades, and played a key role in the Wizards sinking into the disaster that they are today. After Wall, we have Ben Simmons, who came very close to coming in last on this list. In the 2019 offseason, Simmons inked a 5-year, $177 million extension that was set to kick in the following year. At first, it seemed like Philly was pretty much going to be getting exactly what they expected out of their ascending star. Although he still couldn't shoot at all outside the paint, the Sixers became the top team in the East during the 2021 season, largely due to Ben Simmons' playmaking and defense. However, after a tumultuous postseason where Philly was upset by the young Atlanta Hawks in the second round, the organization kind of threw Ben under the bus, which prompted him to demand a trade. From there, he held out from playing for the Sixers in 2022, citing mental health and back issues. Most people thought that the back injury was just an excuse for him not to play, but when he was eventually traded to the Nets at the deadline, he still wasn't anywhere close to being ready to suit up, which led to him missing the entire rest of the season. When he finally came back for 2023, he had the worst season of his career before being shut down after just 42 games due to another back injury. It's been more of the same this year, as he's played in just 6 games so far and has looked like a complete shell of himself in the minutes that he's been on the floor. While his fall from grace has been much steeper than Wall's was, he did receive an All-Star and All-Defensive first-team selection in 2021. And his contract has somehow not negatively impacted the Nets or Sixers too negatively in any way, as both teams have successfully found ways to work around it. But in terms of the counting stats, he has by far the worst numbers on this list, and can't logically be put anywhere higher than 24. Up next, we have Bradley Beal, who has the second largest contract out of anyone on this list. After years of mediocre team results in Washington, it was obvious to most that it was time to move in a different direction and hit the reset button. But the Wizards front office saw differently. This is a weird situation to look at because Bradley Beal is a really good NBA player when he's healthy. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case in quite a while, as he's struggled to stay on the floor for each of the last few seasons. Before his recent string of injuries though, he had back-to-back seasons averaging 30 points a game. Despite that, most people saw that Beal is closer to an option 2 or 3 on a championship contender, and definitely not the franchise centerpiece. But for whatever reason, the Wizards decided to give him a 5-year, $251 million deal in the 2022 offseason. On top of that, they also threw in a no-trade clause for him as well, which is just unheard of in today's NBA. He had a solid first season under his new deal, and then was able to ultimately force his way to Phoenix, where he is the clear-cut third option on that team. While this take might be a little premature, because like I said, he has been injured ever since he got to Phoenix, him taking a backseat on offense with his new team, as well as the fact that he's in a loaded Western Conference, there's a very good chance that Bradley Beal fails to make a single All-Star appearance on this contract, which makes it really hard to put him anywhere higher than this on the list. And since he's already north of 30, Those last couple of years of his deal might bring some real problems for Phoenix given both his injury history and the no trade clause. At number 22, we have Zach LaVine, who got his massive deal due to a very similar situation that Bradley Beal was in with Washington. After a magical first half of the 2022 season where the Bulls were the number 1 seed, injuries decimated their contention chances, and they slid back down to a middle-of-the-pack playoff team. Wanting to recapture that glory from the beginning of the previous season, the Bulls linked LaVine to a 5-year, $215 million extension in the 2022 offseason. Was he worth all of that money? Probably not. But it seemed that the Bulls had a competent core that could compete when healthy for the first time in at least 5 years. So they did what they had to do in order to keep the train rolling. However, things kind of fell apart last season for the Bulls, and after another mediocre start to this year, it seems that both LaVine and Chicago are looking to move on from each other. However, there isn't really much of a market for him because he's so grossly overpaid. While I do think Beal is undoubtedly a better player than LaVine, the fact that Zach's contract doesn't have a no-trade clause makes this deal slightly less egregious than Brad's. This contract had a weirdly fast rise and fall from grace. After trading Chris Paul away and ushering in a new era, the Clippers signed Blake Griffin to a 5-year, $171 million deal to make him the sole face of the franchise. However, midway through the first season of his new contract, Blake was shockingly shipped off to the Pistons. During his first full season with Detroit, Griffin had arguably the best all-around season of his career, making an All-NBA team while putting up 24, 7, and 5 to lead the Pistons back to the playoffs. He gave literally all he had to the team that season, opting to play on a torn meniscus in the first round of the playoffs against the Bucks. This seemed to have zapped any athleticism that he had left in the tank, and his prime immediately ended after this season. Even though Blake was so bad at the end of this contract, he did drag this team to their only playoff appearance in the last 8 seasons, which is a much more impressive accomplishment compared to anything from the guys before him on this list. That wraps up the disaster tier and brings us into the disappointment tier. These guys are quality players and may have put up respectable numbers, but failed to meet the expectations set upon them when they signed these deals. Starting off, we have Tobias Harris, who has honestly been one of the most burdensome contracts in recent memory. After losing Jimmy Butler in free agency, the Sixers made it a focal point to re-sign Harris after they traded for him the season prior. In order to do that, they had to give him a 5-year, $180 million max extension. They made this deal with the expectation that he would develop and become Joel Embiid's co-star. And whether it's been Ben Simmons, James Harden, or Tyrese Maxey, Tobias has consistently been the third option despite having the deal that he does. Harris has put up a consistent 16 to 19 points per game while on this contract, but he's just nowhere near being worth his pay grade. He hasn't been bad, and he's been consistently available, but it's still a really bad contract. It'll be really interesting to see what he commands on the free agency market this summer. Even though he already signed a contract extension with Oklahoma City the season prior, Russell Westbrook renegotiated his deal in 2017 and came away with a 5-year, $206 million extension. This made it seem like OKC was committed to the Russell Westbrook-Paul George pairing long-term, as they also inked PG to a big extension the following offseason. However, after 2 straight disappointing first-round exits, the Thunder blew it up and traded Westbrook to the Rockets. He had a great year in Houston, but flamed out in the playoffs, which led to the Rockets then hitting the reset button and trading Westbrook to the Wizards. Once again, Russ played amazing, averaging a triple-double and leading the Wizards back to the playoffs. From there, Russ forced his way to Los Angeles to team up with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. This was an absolutely horrible fit from the jump. Westbrook was quite literally the worst value contract in the league. It was clear that his All-Star days were over, and at the same time, it didn't really seem like he was ready to buy into a lesser role to help the team. Because of this, LA had a really hard time finding a trade partner for him, until they eventually made a deal with the Jazz at the deadline last year. So despite some amazing personal stats during these years, Russ wasn't able to lead his teams to any significant playoff success on this deal, and also refused to take a backseat until after he was bought out, which makes it really hard to justify a contract this large. Kevin Durant very well may have been cursed ever since he left the Warriors. A lot of what happened was out of his control, but the 4-year, $164 million deal that he originally signed with the Nets back in 2019 can't be looked at anything short of a disappointment. For starters, he missed the entire first season in Brooklyn due to recovery from his torn Achilles. The following year, he missed a bunch of time with injuries, but co-stars Kyrie Irving and James Harden held it down in his absence, and led the Nets to the 2 seed. They are primed to make a run all the way to the championship, but Harden and Kyrie's injuries led to the Nets coming short by just a couple of inches. In 2022, Brooklyn was rolling early on until KD sprained his meniscus in January, which completely derailed their season. The script ended up repeating itself the following year, as he injured his meniscus again in January of 2023. While he was recovering, Kyrie jetted for Dallas, which led to him demanding a trade and heading to Phoenix. With the Suns, he was bounced in the second round by the eventual champion Denver Nuggets. While he's been mostly great while on the floor, this contract has been plagued by injuries and playoff shortcomings. At the end of the day, he's only won 2 playoff series since 2019. One against an injured Celtics team, and one against an injured Clippers team. There's no way this isn't disappointing. While this deal is undoubtedly better because he's been more available, James Harden's final contract that he signed with the Rockets was very similar to the Durant deal that we just talked about. Back in 2017, he signed a 4-year, $171 million deal that was set to kick in during the 2019 season. In that said year, he had the best individual season of his career, averaging a historic 36 points a game. However, his Rockets failed to take advantage of the opportunity in front of them when Kevin Durant got injured against them, and they lost to the Warriors in 6 games in the conference semis. From there, Houston kind of panicked and traded Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook, who was just an odd fit next to Harden. This led to an unsurprising second-round exit in 2020. From there, the Beard forced his way to Brooklyn, where he was honestly amazing until he ran into a series of hamstring issues, which effectively ended his prime as we know it. In 2022, he eventually made his way to the Sixers, where they were put out by the Heat in the second round as well. During this 4-year stretch, Harden failed to reach the conference finals every year, with 3 different but all very competitive teams. So this one's definitely disappointing as well. Klay Thompson is one fortunate set of circumstances away from being a lot closer to the beginning of this list. After tearing his ACL in the 2019 finals, the Warriors still had faith in their sharpshooter and rewarded him with a 5-year, $190 million deal to keep Golden State's core intact. After missing all of the shortened 2020 season due to his ACL, he then missed the entire 2021 season as well after tearing his Achilles in the offseason. So he was 2 years into this max deal without a single game to show for it. He finally came back midway through 2022 and was up and down throughout the rest of the regular season. In the playoffs, his stats were modest compared to previous years, but at the end of the day, he was an integral piece to a team that won the championship. In 2023, he overcame a horrific slump to start the season and put together a very respectable 21 points a game on solid efficiency. However, he flamed out in the playoffs against the Lakers, and was a big reason why they ended up losing in 6 to them. This year, it seems that he's finally starting to show his age, as he's averaging his lowest amount of points since his rookie year. While this contract can't be looked at anything short of disappointing because of all of the missed games, his contributions towards winning a ring definitely makes this deal better than anything else we've seen so far. The true value of Damian Lillard's 4-year, $176 million deal will be determined in these next couple of seasons. After years of harping about loyalty and being content not winning a ring if it meant he could be a Blazer for life, Dame finally caved and requested a trade. While he initially wanted to go to Miami, he eventually wound up in Milwaukee, where he honestly has a much better chance of potentially winning. This deal was really hard to value before the trade. It was pretty unique because no other player of his caliber would be content playing for a mediocre franchise based on the simple precedent of loyalty. But now, it's clear that both he and the Bucks have one goal in mind, and that's a championship. It's still his first season there, so the jury is open on his $45+ million a year deal. If he wins a ring in the next couple of seasons, he'll move much higher on this list. But if he fails, he'll fall quite a few spots because he has no playoff success on this deal. And if he fails, he'll drop quite a few spots. So he'll sit here for now. Kawhi Leonard's tenure with the Clippers has not been very successful thus far. In 2021, it looked like they were turning the corner as they finally made the conference finals, but Kawhi's torn ACL in the second round meant he would miss the entire series. Despite that, LA had no problem giving him a 4-year, $176 million extension to keep him around long term. He missed the entire first year of this deal, which led to the Clippers missing the playoffs. And then in 2023, he played in just 52 regular season games. He was great when he played, but the availability has just not been there for him. There's no better example of this than in the first round of last season, where he took down the Suns in Game 1 without Paul George, but got hurt in Game 2 and then ended up missing the entire rest of the series. He and the Clippers have overcame a slow start this year, and he's having another typically stellar season by his standards. But if he can't stay healthy during the postseason, there's just no way that this contract is worth it. Like his running mate, the Paul George contract has been pretty rough as well. He signed pretty much the exact same contract as Kawhi in 2021, and it yielded pretty much the exact same results. He played in just 31 games in 2022, and then unfortunately got sick before the last play-in game, which led to the Clippers missing the playoffs entirely. Last season, he sprained his knee right before the playoffs, which led to him missing the entire Suns series. In terms of where him and Kawhi rank on the list, I put PG ahead of Kawhi based on the simple fact that he's played in more games thus far under their deals. But unless these two can prove that they can stay healthy for an entire season, there's no chance that they could ever move up from where they're currently at on this list. While Anthony Davis has already signed a 3-year extension that's going to keep him in LA through 2028, we're going to be looking at the 5-year, $189 million deal that he signed back in 2020. Coming off of a championship where he was pretty much just as important as the Finals MVP LeBron James, locking Anthony Davis up long-term seemed like a no-brainer for the Lakers. As LeBron inevitably aged over the course of those next few seasons, it was expected that AD would assume the role of the clear-cut number 1 option, but that really has not been the case. Aside from the constant injuries, it still seems like the 39-year-old LeBron is the focal point of the offense, which is pretty ridiculous if you ask me. AD can single-handedly carry a team defense on his own, but LA can't be anything but disappointed with his peaks and valleys on the offensive end. Since he's seemingly healthy now and there's 2 more years left on this deal, AD can move way up on this list with another couple of deep playoff runs, but at the end of the day, Lakers fans are not going to be satisfied with this deal unless he delivers another banner. Now, we'll move into the necessary overpay tier. This is for players who undoubtedly got paid more than they were worth, but the team they're playing for is still satisfied nonetheless. Rudy Gobert is one of the more unique contracts on this list. While he really doesn't provide much of anything on offense, he is probably the best defensive anchor in the NBA, and has repeatedly proven that just him on the floor can lead to an above-average team defense, at least in the regular season. Rudy signed a 5-year, $205 million contract with the Jazz in 2021, but the deal didn't kick in until the 2022 season. 2021 was awesome, as he led the Jazz to the first seed in the West, but they were upset by the shorthanded Clippers in the second round, largely due to Gobert's inability to defend on the perimeter when LA went small. The following season in Utah was very underwhelming, leading to him to be traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves. During his first season in Minnesota, the team battled constant injuries throughout the season, and it looked like their double big lineup quite simply wasn't going to work out. However, the team has rounded into form this season and is currently the top seed in the West. Not only that, but they're well equipped to contend for the next few years as well, as all of their core players are under contract. While the jury remains open on whether or not Gobert's abilities translate to a playoff setting, he is a vital member of what seems to be at the very least an extremely competent Minnesota team, which is something that the franchise hasn't been for the majority of its existence. Because of that, I would say that Minnesota's happy with Gobert's output no matter what happens in the playoffs. This might be the most textbook overpay on the list. After overcoming back problems and playing his way into a starting role, Michael Porter Jr. received a 5-year, $172 million extension to stay with the Nuggets long term. While the price point was definitely high, he just averaged 19 points a game on above 40% three-point shooting in his age 22 season. Right there, it was obvious that he was an absolutely perfect fit alongside Jokic. If he developed into anything more than just an elite floor spacer, this contract would be seen as a bargain. However, MPJ played in just 9 games during his first season following the extension, as his back problems flared up again. All of a sudden, this looked like the contract could become a real issue for Denver if he couldn't get his back problems under control. Thankfully for him and the team, Porter was in fact able to resolve his issues, and he was the reliable floor spacer that the Nuggets needed to win the championship last season. While he hasn't really developed into anything more like I mentioned previously, Denver would not have won without him last year, so that alone makes this contract worth it in my eyes. However, it's hard to look at guys like Aaron Gordon and KCP who are making much less money compared to him, and are just as, if not more important to the team compared to him. Trae Young consistently puts up some of the best numbers in the league, but it doesn't always lead to team success. Following a surprise run to the conference finals that seemed like a coming out party for the Hawks, Atlanta signed Trae to a 5-year, $215 million max extension in the summer of 2021. This was an obvious move at the time, as it seemed like the team was close to becoming a real contender if they made smart moves and continued to build around Trae. However, they really haven't done anything right since this moment. Last season was the first year of the deal, and it got off to quite a rocky start. The team traded for DeJounte Murray in the offseason, who proved to be a very clunky fit next to Trae. Despite the poor roster creation as well as Murray being suspended for a game, Young dragged the Hawks to 2 big wins against the Celtics in the first round, and nearly forced a Game 7. This season, he's putting up his typical Trae Young numbers, but Atlanta is currently well under 500. Of course, him being one of the worst defenders in NBA history does complicate things quite a bit. Most guys who have a contract north of $200 million are at the very least serviceable on the defensive end, if not a force. But when you're as small as he is, it's much harder to properly build out a championship team around him, because you have to make up for his glaring deficiencies. So with the steep price tag, nothing more than a first round exit, as well as no clear direction for the future, this contract is ultimately going to be hindered by the lack of team success. But at the end of the day, where would the Hawks be without Trae? That question alone explains his spot on this list. Chris Middleton signed almost the exact same deal that Michael Porter signed from before, a 5-year, $177.5 million deal. This came off the heels of his first All-Star appearance, as well as Milwaukee's first year as a legitimate contender. So pairing him up with Giannis long-term was a no-brainer. And I don't think Milwaukee could have asked for much more than what they got out of this deal. Despite his somewhat underwhelming 2020 postseason run in his first year on this contract, Khris stepped up in a big way during the 2021 playoffs, closing out games and hitting a ton of big shots for the Bucks en route to a championship. And again, if you win a ring during your contract, it pretty much automatically makes the deal worth it. The next year, he did miss the entire second round against Boston, which kind of eliminated any chance of them repeating, but he did have a very solid first round against the Heat last year despite them losing. Today, he's definitely not the same player he was in 2021, but I still think Bucks fans are going to be looking back at this contract happy with what they got out of him, considering it led to them hoisting the Larry O'Brien trophy. Donovan Mitchell has run into what seems to be the exact same situation he was in while he was with Utah. After having one of the greatest playoff series of all time during a first-round loss in 2020, the Jazz inked Donovan Mitchell to a 5-year, $163 million deal, which was set to kick in during the 2022 season like Gobert. But like I mentioned before, by the time this deal came around, it was clear that Utah just could not make a deep playoff run with the Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell pairing. So they blew it up and traded Mitchell to the Cavs. In his first year there, Mitchell made his 4th straight All-Star game, and Cleveland won 51 games in a very competitive Eastern Conference. Once again, the playoffs proved that this roster might not be compatible for contention, as the Cavs were upset by the Knicks in just 5 games. This year, D-Mitch is putting up his typical stellar numbers, but it just doesn't seem like Cleveland has much of a chance to beat any of the top-tier teams in the East. Because of this, there's already rumblings that Cleveland may look to trade him in the next year or so, which would indicate that their attempt to bring him in and build a contender was a failure. But regardless, Donovan puts people in seats and has played a big part in both Utah and Cleveland becoming relevant in recent NBA history, which means a lot to small market teams of their nature. Now, we move into the home run tier. All of the players from this point forward are bona fide superstars, and the teams that they play for are more than happy with these guys being the faces of their franchises. At no fault of his own, this contract could get very messy towards the end. Back in 2021, Stephen Curry signed a 4-year, $215 million extension that began last season. As we all know, Steph had a phenomenal 2023 campaign, putting up similar numbers to his unanimous MVP year. However, we also found out that this Warriors lineup was deeply flawed, and they were stumped by the Lakers in 6 games in the second round. Without any major changes, this season has been even worse team-wise, as the Dubs are currently under 500 despite another solid season from Steph. As of my writing of this video, Wiggins and Looney seem to have completely fallen off a cliff, and Clay and Draymond are just simply past their prime. Basically, the other 4 players from their starting 5 of their championship team in 2022 look like they need to be replaced in the near future, which is going to be quite the task for Mike Dunleavy to pull off. It just doesn't seem realistic that this team's championship window is still open. But at the end of the day, Stephen Curry is the Golden State Warriors. So even though Steph's team results likely won't be very good during this deal, there's just no way that you can consider any deal with the best player to ever wear your jersey still in his prime being a bad contract at the end of the day. Like the current contract Steph is on right now, we can all see that Luka is worth every single penny of his 5-year, $215 million deal from 2023 to 2027. In terms of team success, he's proven that as long as he has a solid supporting cast around him, he's good enough to carry his team farther than they probably should in the playoffs, just like he did 2 seasons ago when they went to the conference finals. However, him missing the postseason entirely last year is undoubtedly a stain on his legacy and got things off on the wrong foot to say the least. Of course, the roster around him did suck for 2023, but I still think he should have been able to at least get his team into the play-in tournament. I'm sure by the time this deal is done, Luka will have a few more seasons averaging north of 30 points while flirting with a triple-double. The only question is if his front office can push the right buttons and get him into contention. If they can, we all know Luka will be able to take it to another level during the playoffs, and he'll likely jump up a few spots in this list. But until then, he's stuck at 6 for now. De'Aaron Fox might have pound for pound the most valuable contract to his team in the league. He signed a 5-year, $163 million deal back in 2020 that was set to kick in during the 2022 season. This deal was signed during a time where Sacramento was historically mediocre at not only building a competent team, but developing their young players. So it seemed like not only the team was taking a chance on Fox developing into their franchise cornerstone, but Fox was taking a chance on the team finally getting their act together. Thankfully for both sides, this has worked out just about as well as anyone could imagine. The big goal during this time was for the Kings to finally get back to the playoffs for the first time since 2006, and Fox was able to do just that in 2023. De'Aaron and Sacramento not only grabbed the 3 seed in the West, but they created one of the best environments in the NBA with their Light the Beam movement. Fox's numbers have been incredible on this deal, and he's become the superstar that the franchise was desperately looking for the last 2 decades. They succeeded in becoming relevant again, and the next step is rising into the title contender tier. Whether or not they reach that level is yet to be seen, but we do know that Sacramento is at the very least a good basketball team again, and they can thank De'Aaron Fox for that. I expect this contract to definitely move up on the list by the time it concludes, but I just can't put Giannis any higher than 4 at the moment. And before you dislike the video and unsubscribe, let me make this clear. This 5-year, $228 million deal that he signed back in 2020 didn't kick in until after he won the championship. And in the time since then, the Bucks as a whole have been disappointing. However, unlike the guys in the disappointing and necessary overpay tier, Giannis has been one of, if not the best player in the world during these last 2 seasons. He's been averaging 30, 11, and 6 in the regular season with some of the best defense in the league to go along with that on this deal so far. During the playoffs, they failed to repeat in 2022 as they lost in the second round to the Celtics in a 7-game thriller. This series had no business going on as long as it did, as the Bucks were without Chris Middleton like I mentioned. The main reason it went the distance is because Giannis put up 33, 14, and 7 against an all-time great defense. So he gets a pass here in my eyes. Last year, he hurt his back in Game 1 of their first round series against the Heat and ended up missing Games 2 and 3. He ended up playing while seemingly hurt in Games 4 and 5, where they ended up losing both and got shockingly eliminated. His numbers were down compared to usual, but then again, it seemed like his back was still bothering him. With 2 straight playoff runs where either he or his team was hurt, I really don't have much merit to put him any higher than this on the list. With another 2 seasons ahead on this deal, he still has 2 more chances to move up. These next 2 guys are on absolute steals of contracts. Starting with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's been with the Thunder through their rebuild ever since 2020 and became the focal point of this OKC project when he signed a 5-year, $179 million extension with the team in August of 2021. That deal began last year, which is the exact moment he ascended to superstardom, as he established himself as one of the truly elite scorers in the league. This year, it's been more of the same, but his supporting cast has finally developed around him, which has led to the Thunder becoming one of the best teams in the NBA. And at just 25 years old, SGA and OKC are going to remain competitive for many years to come. Sam Presti got this deal done at the absolute perfect time because his ascent to All-NBA status on the exact year this deal kicked in ensures that Presti has the ability to put all of his chips on the table throughout these next 4 years without being tied down to the financial implications that come with a $200+ million deal. They'll not only be able to keep their main rotation pieces for the next few seasons, but they could also maybe use their treasure chest of draft picks, make a trade, and get even better. With the team seemingly improving every night, as well as SGA becoming a bona fide MVP candidate, this deal is about as good as it gets. The only thing that's missing at the moment is playoff success, but it's hard to think that it won't eventually come, because this team is really giving shades of the 2011-2012 era of OKC. Like the Shai contract, the Celtics inked Jason Tatum to his 5-year, $163 million deal at the absolute perfect time. The 2 sides got this deal done prior to the 2021 season, and it was set to kick in starting in 2022. While $163 million is definitely not a small amount of money, Tatum had developed into a franchise cornerstone by the time the deal began. Getting it done when they did has given the team the flexibility to make the various moves that they've done over the last couple of seasons to put them in a position to make moves for guys like Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday. And in terms of team success, the Celtics have been just about as good as you can without winning the title. In the first 2 years of this deal, they've been to the finals and lost in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. This has also come with 2 straight All-NBA first-team selections for JT as well. The only thing holding him back from moving up to the top spot on this list is the fact that he hasn't won a championship or an MVP yet. If he does one or both of those things in the next 3 seasons, he'll inevitably pass the only player ahead of him. It's pretty hard to argue against this being the best value contract on this list. After being criminally underpaid for most of his career, Stephen Curry cashed out in the 2017 offseason, signing a 5-year, $201 million deal, making him the first player in NBA history to get a contract north of the 200 mark. He followed that up by leading the Warriors to a championship in 2018, and then back to the finals in 2019 before his team got decimated by injuries, leading to them losing to the Raptors. 2020 was a down year as he broke his hand just a few games in, but he immediately showed in 2021 that he was still capable of being the best player on a championship team, as he led the league in scoring with 32 points per game. He then did just that in 2022, as he led the Dubs back to the promised land, taking down the Celtics in the finals to secure his 4th ring. During this 5-year span, he won a scoring title, had 4 All-NBA selections, 2 championships, as well as a finals MVP. At the moment, there is nobody who comes close to doing what he did during this stretch, which makes it by far the best contract that we've looked at. 26 deals and $4.9 billion later, we have finally reached the end of this list. This is a grind to complete and is by far the longest video that I've ever made. So if you made it this far and like the longer form content, please help me out by giving me a like. Also, be sure to let me know what you think of my rankings as well. I want to know if I'm a basketball genius or a complete idiot. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.